Step into the whirlwind of Napoleon's empire with Military Memoirs from 1804 to 1814 by Raymond Aimery de Montesquiou-Fezensac, a gripping first-hand account of Europe's most iconic military campaigns. From the triumphs of Austerlitz to the frozen retreat from Moscow, this memoir thrusts you into the heart of the action. These are his words. Let's begin. The 3rd Division departed from the camp at Montreuil on September 1st. The first 2 divisions had left a day earlier, and these 2 days proved invaluable in preparing for such an abrupt departure. We marched by division, with the left flank leading, composed of the 59th Regiment, the 50th, the 27th, and the 23rd Light Infantry. Marching by division is highly fatiguing for troops. Accommodating 8,000 men requires a significant amount of space, and after a long march, companies often found themselves forced to navigate side roads and travel considerable distances to reach the villages assigned to them. The 59th Regiment, at the head of the column, was under the command of Battalion Chief Silbermann, who led the vanguard. I was part of this vanguard on our departure day, along with another second lieutenant. Unfortunately, I was late, and my comrade followed my example. By the time we caught up to the vanguard, it was far ahead. When we presented our excuses to the commander, he replied with Alsatian calmness, "Gentlemen, I never wait for anyone, and I never make others wait. You are under arrest." This punishment at the outset of a campaign greatly disheartened me. It felt like a grim reminder of the past and a sinister omen for the future. In 26 days, the division reached the banks of the Rhine at Seltz, south of Strasbourg, passing through Arras, La Fère, Reims, Châlons, Vitry, Saint-Dizier, Nancy, and Saverne. We marched in perfect order, 3 ranks deep, with officers remaining constantly with their companies. One day, I lingered 15 minutes to finish breakfast during a rest stop. My captain promptly informed me that even he would not permit himself such behaviour. When officers set such an example, it ensures everything runs smoothly. As a result, the passage of such a large army produced no complaints. Many conscripts in our regiment endured the long march admirably. There were few illnesses, no stragglers, and even soldiers granted brief leave to visit their families returned before the crossing of the Rhine. I had hoped for leave to see my family after a year's absence and just before entering the campaign. My colonel had promised this to my mother. To my surprise, on the 2nd day of the march, he left for Luxembourg, the regiment's depot, without mentioning the matter. He rejoined us on the 15th at Saint-Dizier, and I soon learned the reason for his strictness. On the 2nd day of the march, I was assigned to the rear guard, a tedious duty as it involves ensuring all baggage moves forward. During a long stage, I was chatting with a cantinière who mentioned she felt tired and unwell. Without much thought, I offered her my arm, as I might to a lady in Paris. General Malher witnessed this scene and complimented my colonel on the gallantry of his officers in assisting cantinière. This minor indiscretion provoked my colonel's anger. He sternly rebuked me for my thoughtlessness, explaining that it had delayed my leave. Nevertheless, he assured me that my family should not be punished for my mistake. He granted me leave on the condition that I return in time for the crossing of the Rhine on the 26th. In just 12 days, I had to cover 200 leagues in a post-chaise, as I could not afford to miss a moment with my family. Without a carriage, I rented whatever transport was available at each post, a cabriolet, a cart, or a small wagon, each pulled by a single horse. The postilion rode beside me as we travelled day and night, stopping only briefly to eat. My arrival in Paris on September 17th was a joyous occasion for both my family and me. Having spent a year at the camp, my time in Paris felt like an enchanted dream. The sophistication of Parisian society, women's attire, conversation, manners, transported me to a world that seemed entirely different from the camp at Montreuil. Reluctantly, I left Paris to return to the regiment, travelling as I had before, in a post wagon, day and night. My youth and health allowed me to endure this grueling journey. I arrived in Seltz on September 26th, just in time for the Rhine crossing. The division crossed the Rhine on September 27th on a pontoon bridge between Seltz and Lauterburg. The crossing was a celebration, with soldiers adorning their uniforms with small tree branches as makeshift laurels. We paraded on the opposite bank before the generals, shouting, "Vive l'Empereur!" On September 30th, the corps of the army assembled at Stuttgart, passing through Karlsruhe and Pforzheim. We remained there until October 3rd, preparing for the campaign to come. It is now necessary to describe the enemy's position and Napoleon's strategy. This will clarify the role of the 6th Corps in these operations and the part played by the 59th Regiment in the overall campaign. In the autumn of 1805, the coalition formed by the English, Austrians, Russians, Swedes, and Neapolitans sought to draw Bavaria, the rest of Germany, and even Prussia into their alliance. Several offensives were planned, through Pomerania, Lombardy, and southern Italy. However, the only one of concern here would follow the Danube Valley, assigned to the Austrians and Russians. The Russians, however, were delayed. Had the Austrian army advanced to meet them, it would have exposed Germany, allowing Napoleon to invade and compel the region to join him. General Mack, commanding the Austrian army, sought to preempt this. He traversed Bavaria and took a defensive position, with his right at Ulm and his left at Memmingen, covered by the Iller River. Mack assumed Napoleon would attack frontally through the Black Forest passes between Strasbourg and Schaffhausen. Confident in the strong position he had chosen, Mack believed he could retreat toward the Russians if defeated. Mack sent General Kienmeyer to Ingolstadt to monitor the Bavarians and coordinate with the approaching Russians. Napoleon, however, devised a completely different plan. He did not aim to merely defeat the Austrians, but to envelop and annihilate them, clearing his path to confront the Russians. Napoleon organized his army into 7 corps, naming it the Grande Armée, a title destined for fame. Each corps consisted of 2 or 3 infantry divisions, a cavalry brigade, and some artillery. Marshal Bernadotte commanded the 1st Corps, Marmont the 2nd, Davout the 3rd, Soult the 4th, Lannes the 5th, Ney the 6th, and Augereau the 7th. The heavy cavalry, comprising carabiniers, cuirassiers, and dragoons, was united into a single corps under Prince Murat. The Imperial Guard served as the reserve. The Grande Armée consisted of 186,000 combatants, soon to be joined by 25,000 Bavarians and 8,000 soldiers from Baden and Württemberg. Napoleon's strategy was meticulous. On September 23rd, Murat, with part of the cavalry and a few battalions from the 5th Corps, crossed the Rhine at Strasbourg, appearing to be the army's vanguard. He moved toward the Black Forest passes to mislead General Mack into expecting an attack from that direction. False intelligence and purchases of supplies reinforced this deception. Meanwhile, the main body of the Grande Armée crossed the Rhine from right to left. The 6th Corps at Lauterburg, the 4th at Speyer, the 3rd at Mannheim, and the 1st and 2nd arriving from Holland and Hanover to Würzburg. These corps converged on the lower Danube, intending to cross at Donauwörth, secure the territory between the Lech and Iller rivers, force a crossing of the Iller, and encircle Ulm from the right bank. Marshal Ney and the 6th Corps were to remain on the left bank, advancing as close to Ulm as possible. On October 3rd, we left Stuttgart, following the main road to Ulm. The 3rd Division stayed in poor villages for 2 days. On the evening of October 5th, before reaching Geislingen, we veered left to join the movements of other corps on the lower Danube. Marching through the night and the following day, with only brief rests and no food, we endured a grueling advance. Napoleon had ordered soldiers to carry 4 days' worth of bread and for 4 days' worth of biscuits to be stocked in the supply wagons. Whether this was true for other corps, I cannot say, but we had nothing. The 59th Regiment, being the last in numerical order, arrived at the bivouac near Giengen late at night. General Malher, stationed in the nearby town, refused the colonel's request to requisition provisions, as he had promised to spare the area. This refusal, however, implicitly encouraged disorder, as nearby villages were ransacked. Thus, our first day of bivouacking became our first day of looting. The following day, October 7th, we bivouacked near Höchstädt. That same day, Marshal Soult crossed the Danube at Donauwörth. Marshal Ney received orders to double back toward Ulm, seize the bridges at Günzburg and Leipheim, tighten the encirclement, and secure communication between both riverbanks. The 3rd Division was tasked with this operation. Approaching Leipheim proved impossible due to impassable marshes surrounding the area. General Malher, with General Marquinet's brigade, attempted to capture the main bridge at Günzburg, directly across from the town. The Danube splits into several channels at this point, forming islands. These were all bravely taken. However, crossing the main branch of the Danube, which bordered the town, was impossible. A section of the bridge had been destroyed, and workers attempting to repair it were exposed to Austrian fire from the opposite bank. After heavy losses, nearly 300 men, the operation was abandoned. General Labassée, with the 59th Regiment, was then ordered to capture another bridge downstream from Günzburg. On October 8th, the regiment reached Gundelfingen late. It was a difficult day. Many soldiers, exhausted from prior marches, fell behind. The colonel convened the sergeant-majors and sternly reminded them of a soldier's duty to endure fatigue, hunger, and all forms of hardship without complaint. "It is not enough to be brave," he added. "We are all brave, and I myself may fall tomorrow." These words, sadly, proved prophetic. The next day, October 9th, the 2nd Battalion led the advance. That evening, our conscripts faced the enemy for the first time. The skirmishers drove the Austrians from the woods in front of the bridge, which was then captured at a charge. The colonel stationed 3 companies from the 1st Battalion, our 6th, 7th, and 8th, as reserves at the bridge's entrance. Mine was the 7th Company. We remained in position for a long time, frustrated at being unable to share in the glory and danger of our comrades. Lefebvre, the battalion adjutant, stayed with us. "Here I am at my post," he remarked, "with the left half battalion." This was indeed the adjutant's role, though I could not help but think that, when there was a comfortable chateau nearby, he was less inclined to remain so strictly at his post. From our position we saw wounded soldiers and a number of prisoners, whom the 8th Company escorted to Gundelfingen. At nightfall, we were finally ordered to rejoin the regiment. The bridge, partially destroyed, allowed only one man to cross at a time. When my company's turn came, our captain crossed first, running ahead without looking back. The first sergeant and the soldiers followed as best they could. As for me, I forgot in that moment that a young officer's first priority before the enemy is to establish his reputation. Instead of acting as a second lieutenant, I presumed to play the general. Believing it most important to ensure the soldiers crossed, and fearing many might lag behind in the dark, I let everyone pass before me, crossing last in the regiment. When I finally rejoined my captain, he laughed, a laugh that seemed to say, "You're here, just as I expected, but it was about time." It was only much later that I fully understood the lesson in that laugh. We found the regiment in considerable disorder. It had withstood cavalry charges and infantry fire, earning much honour for the day. To be truthful, I do not believe the enemy's attacks were particularly vigorous. The officers were visibly unsettled and focused on rallying the soldiers and trying to restore order, as the companies were intermixed. As I mentioned earlier, crossing the bridge one by one placed them in the line of fire before they could properly form ranks for defence. I am convinced that if the enemy had launched a bayonet charge or a cavalry attack on our flanks at that moment, it would have driven us back into the Danube. In such a situation, our 2 reserve companies could have provided significant support. However, the captains, eager to reach the battlefield, failed to organise them after crossing the bridge. Had the regiment been routed, the reserves would have been swept along with the retreat. Fortunately, it was night time. The Austrians were unaware of how few we were. and I believe they only engaged us to secure their retreat. The firing soon ceased. The 50th Regiment joined us, and it was unfortunate they had not arrived earlier. We spent the night under arms without lighting fires. I learned that Colonel Lacquet had sustained a grave wound and died while being transported across the bridge. His final words were to instruct the officer escorting him to leave him behind and return to the fight. At dawn, we entered Günzburg, which the enemy had abandoned, and we managed to get a few hours of sleep. The loss of Colonel Lacquet was deeply felt throughout the army, particularly in his regiment. Even those who liked him the least, or felt treated harshly by him, acknowledged his admirable and noble qualities. He was buried the same day in the Günzburg cemetery. The regiments assembled in the town attended the ceremony. My captain delivered a short speech which I regret not preserving. Colonel Colbert, a close friend of Lacquet, requested his sword tassel as a keepsake and vowed, in true military fashion, to honour it by delivering a good strike with it in combat, a promise he faithfully kept. As for me, the loss was a personal blow. He had shown me a father's kindness, secured my officer's commission, and encouraged me in my service. The letter I wrote to my mother that day was interrupted several times by my tears. This initial engagement revealed much about character, courage, and occasionally, weakness. Captain Villars seized the moment to embellish his reputation. We found him wounded in a house in Günzburg, where he claimed to have been knocked to the ground while receiving sabre and bayonet strikes. I laughed to myself, he said, and thought, they're fooled. They believe I will surrender, but I won't. Ultimately, he was taken prisoner, but only after being incapable of resistance, much like General Cambronne at Waterloo. Sergeant Decour, my former comrade and then Sergeant Major, behaved brilliantly, sustained a minor injury, and was awarded the Legion of Honour. First encounters with battle are formative for young soldiers. A sergeant I knew hid during the action, and he was not the only one. Each company had similar tales to tell. Night engagements are especially forgiving for those inclined to slip away. They can claim to have gotten lost in the woods or fallen into a stream. Over my military career, I marvelled at the skill some individuals displayed in consistently avoiding danger without ever seeming cowardly. In the Günzburg engagement, the regiment lost 12 men, including Colonel Lacquet and 2 second lieutenants, and had about 40 wounded, including Captain Villars. Major Silbermann, the senior of the 2 battalion commanders, assumed command of the regiment. Meanwhile, other army corps were crossing the Danube at various points and securing the territory between the Iller and Lech rivers. A notable combat occurred on the 8th at Wertingen, where Marshal Soult entered Augsburg on the same day. Marshal Bernadotte, having completed a long march, neared Munich. Napoleon, who had remained for several days at Donauwörth, moved to Augsburg to receive intelligence about the Russian army and direct operations. He left Marshals Ney and Lanz, along with Prince Murat, in the vicinity of Ulm, appointing Murat as overall commander. This appointment, a favour owed to Murat's princely status and his being the emperor's brother-in-law, caused significant displeasure among the marshals who clashed with him. Since capturing the bridge at Günzburg, the French controlled both banks of the Danube. General Dupont was positioned alone on the left bank at Albeck. Marshal Ney sought to support him with the other 2 divisions of the 6th Corps, a decision soon vindicated. Dupont, ordered to approach Ulm and believing he had support, encountered 6,000 men facing 60,000 Austrians. Displaying remarkable audacity, he launched an attack, leading the Austrians to assume his division was merely the vanguard of a larger army. After enduring an uneven battle throughout the day, he withdrew to Albeck that evening, bringing back 4,000 prisoners. Napoleon, arriving in Augsburg on October 13th, reprimanded Ney for allowing Dupont's division to overextend itself, but recognized the necessity of securing the Elchingen bridge and heights to tighten the siege of Ulm. Ney executed this operation with exceptional vigour. The 1st Division repaired the damaged bridge under heavy fire, captured the village and convent on the heights, and routed the enemy forces. The climax came on October 20th, when the garrison at Ulm, numbering 27,000 troops, capitulated and surrendered with the honours of war. Napoleon observed the surrender, engaging respectfully with Austrian generals, while delivering sharp rebukes about Austrian policy. Thus ended this brief yet momentous campaign. What astonishes most is that, on September 1st, we were still at the Boulogne camp, and by October 20th, 60,000 Austrians, with their equipment, cavalry, and artillery, were in our hands. This short and dazzling campaign serves as a testament to Napoleon's unparalleled strategic genius and the formidable organization of the Grande Armée. Reflecting on these events, I can better appreciate how they shaped my understanding of military life and prepared me for the hardships to come in future campaigns. The operation demonstrated how swift maneuvers, precise coordination, and an unrelenting pursuit of the enemy could yield astonishing results. Yet it also exposed the harsh realities of war: exhaustion, scarcity, and the moral dilemmas faced by soldiers. We endured marches that seemed endless, surviving on rations that often failed to reach us. The physical strain of slogging through mud and snow, coupled with sleepless nights under the open sky, tested the limits of human endurance. There was little room for error or hesitation. Commanders were required to make decisions under extraordinary pressure, and soldiers had to respond with absolute obedience and trust. I learned that leadership, in both its boldness and compassion, was the linchpin of success. A captain sharing the burdens of his men, enduring the same cold and hunger, could inspire remarkable loyalty and resilience in his troops. It was a lesson I carried with me throughout my career. One of the most vivid memories of this campaign was witnessing the contrasting emotions among our ranks and those of the enemy. The Austrians, worn down and demoralized, marched into captivity with a stoic resignation. Some maintained an air of dignity despite their defeat, while others seemed utterly broken. Among our own men there was a sense of triumph, tempered by exhaustion and the knowledge that many comrades had been lost. Victory, though sweet, carried the bitter tang of sacrifice. For me personally, the campaign was a turning point. It marked my transformation from a novice officer, uncertain and untested, to someone who had faced the crucible of war and emerged with a deeper understanding of its complexities. The camaraderie forged in the shared hardships of the march and battlefield, the discipline honed through relentless challenges, and the insights gained from observing the decisions of our leaders, all these experiences laid the foundation for my future roles in the army. As we prepared to march further into Europe, the glow of our success at Ulm gave us renewed confidence. Yet, we knew that greater trials awaited us. The Russians, emboldened by their alliance with Austria, were advancing, and Napoleon was determined to confront them head-on. The campaign of 1805 was far from over. It was merely the prelude to even greater struggles and triumphs. Looking back, I am struck by the scale and scope of what we achieved in such a short time. It was a testament to the brilliance of Napoleon's vision and the unparalleled discipline and dedication of the Grande Armée. It was a moment in history that I was proud to have witnessed and contributed to, however small my role may have been. And yet, as always in war, it was a moment paid for with the blood and toil of countless soldiers whose sacrifices should never be forgotten. All these factors fostered insubordination, indiscipline, and looting. During such adverse conditions, when soldiers ventured into villages to procure provisions, the temptation to stay there became overwhelming. Consequently, the number of isolated men roaming the countryside grew considerably. The inhabitants suffered from various forms of mistreatment, and injured officers attempting to restore order often faced threats from marauding soldiers. These details are often absent from the history books recounting our military campaigns. Readers only see a valorous army, devoted soldiers striving for glory alongside their officers. They remain unaware of the immense suffering that often accompanies these triumphant moments. They do not realize how acts of selfishness and cowardice coexist alongside gestures of generosity and bravery within an army. The swift surrender of Ulm quickly put an end to much of this disorder. The isolated soldiers returned to their units, and some faced military punishment from their comrades. I even witnessed captains, on occasion, delivering a few blows with a cane. Admittedly, there are some men for whom such measures are the only way to enforce discipline. However, this method must be used sparingly and with discernment, as there are certain soldiers who would rebel over much less. Yet those individuals are generally not the ones requiring such lessons. The 6th Corps remained in Ulm for 6 days under the terms of the capitulation. This extended stay, unusually long for that time, allowed us to recover from our exhaustion and prepare for the challenges that lay ahead. That concludes the 3rd part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe for more episodes and leave a comment.